everyone, and welcome to How Did We Get Here, a show on ThinkTech Hawaii, hosted by me. I'm DeSoto Brown. I am in Honolulu, the curator of the archives department at Bishop Museum, and I'm also the Bishop Museum historian. And today I'm going to be showing you images that come just from my personal collection. So, as you can see on your screen, we're talking about Honolulu then and now. And this is something I enjoy doing, and I put together old historic photographs with current day views of the exact same location so that we can talk about and I can describe to you how things have changed, why things have changed, and sometimes why things haven't changed as much as others. And remarkably, some of the pairs of pictures you're going to be seeing today don't show a tremendous amount of change, even though decades have passed between the two views that I'll be showing you. And we're starting with this view of Fort Street in downtown Honolulu in 1949. And everything in this picture almost is gone. Very little still survives today, all these many years later. In the distance at the end of Fort Street, you can see Aloha Tower, which is still standing. And one of the buildings on the left side of the street, the Judd building, is also still standing, although it's difficult for me to point it out to you because it's kind of in the distance. Everything else is gone. Downtown Honolulu has changed a great deal. But this picture is a very good indication of why and how that has changed. And I'm going to be talking more about that as I go through this presentation. So, to start with, here we are on the Poly Highway in 1959. The Poly Highway had been constructed during the 1950s, and it was built in this section over what had originally been Nuuanu Avenue. Nuuanu Avenue originally was a two-lane street that went through a residential area. And it was the only access to be able to drive from the Honolulu side of Oahu over the Ko'olau mountain range to get to the windward side of Oahu, specifically to Kaneohe and Kailua, the two nearest towns to where you got down to the bottom of the mountainside when you drove through what's now the Nu'uanu Poly Lookout. There was only one lane in both directions. And as the windward side grew with more inhabitants in the post war period, the traffic increased. And it had been realized many years earlier that another route or an improved route was needed to get from one side of the island to the other. And in the 1950s, this construction began. And it took quite a long time because it wasn't just widening that two-lane Nu'uanu Avenue to become the Poly Highway that we see here, which of course required the condemnation of a great deal of private property because there were businesses, not businesses, but there were homes lining this street. It also was necessary to construct the poly tunnels. And at the same time that that was going on, Likelike Highway and the Wilson tunnels were being constructed through Kalihi Valley. And then, of course, today we have the H3 freeway that goes through the mountains too. So when this picture was taken, the Poly Highway was a few years old. And we are standing right here across the street from a historic site, Hanaya Kamalama, which in English is called Queen Emma's Summer Palace. And that's what's behind those big trees on the right. So now let's come forward in time. And here's what it looks like today. And what's remarkable is it doesn't look that different. And you would think after the passage of more than 65 years, there'd been a lot of significant changes. And in fact, there haven't been. The trees are still there. Hanaya Kamalama is still there, and you can just barely see it. It's a white house that you can see through the trees. But otherwise, there's not a lot of major differences that you can see, at least in this particular view. The Poly Highway has been restriped, repainted, so that now there are three lanes going in both directions, as opposed to two lanes, which is what it was meant to do when it was originally built. And now let's look at the two views side by side. And again, this really makes it clear that not a lot of changes have occurred, which again is surprising to me because you would expect a great deal more to happen. Again, the two views show the Hanaya Kamalama property with the large historic trees that were already there, and they're still there. And then everything else doesn't look that much different. Now, of course, there's a great deal more traffic today during rush hours. Um, Neither of these photographs show that. But the Poly Highway, you must realize, were had we not committed to building these routes across the center of our island, we would be in terrible trouble today. It would be impossible to drive around because the number of vehicles has increased so much in the ensuing years. It's necessary to build big roads, even if they are not always the best thing for the surrounding area. But that's more than I'm going to get into right this minute. Okay, now we're in Waikiki. We're on Kalakaua Avenue, and it's 1955. And 1955 was a pivotal year for the district of Waikiki because it began to grow very dramatically. And by that, I mean four new high rise buildings were built all in that same year. And they were all 10 stories each. This was a huge change for Waikiki. And today, of course, those 10-story buildings seem insignificant. But at the time, they were very important. And in this photograph, you can see evidence of two of those new buildings. Across the street on the right is the base of the first of these buildings, which is being finished here. And this is the Waikiki Biltmore Hotel, which opened, I believe, in March of 1955. So this picture is early in the year. And the base of the building, which had restaurants, it had swimming pool, it had retail spaces, that's what's being finished on the right. And in the distance on the left is also one of those new 10-story buildings. This is the Princess Kaiulani Hotel, which opened in June of 1955. And this building is still standing today. And it has been joined by two other buildings on the site, which enlarged the Princess Kaiulani substantially. To the right of this building, another tower was built in 1960, the same height. And then in 1970, a 28-story tower was added to the Princess Kaiulani property. And what happened to the Waikiki Biltmore Hotel, which is what's on the right? Well, in 1974, it was demolished after standing for only 19 years. It was the first large scale not mass, but it was the first large scale dynamiting slash explosive demolition to take place here in the Hawaiian Islands. It was blown up. I watched it happen from just a block away. And it was replaced by these two towers of the Hyatt Regency Hotel, which opened in 1976. And originally, this development was called the Hemeter Center after the developer who built it, whose name was Chris Hemeter. So, this is that same view from the street today in 2025, which is when I am recording this particular program. And as I said, there's the Princess Kaiulani Hotel in the background. Well, you can't see that original building because it's blocked by the Hyatt, but you can see the 10-story building, which was added to the hotel in 1970. That's on the far left. And also in this view, you see a bunch of Honolulu Police Department vehicles. And they are a very common sight at this location because this is the site just to the left outside of this picture of the Honolulu Police Department's Waikiki substation. So there are always police cars parked on both sides of the street here. And here's what it looks like today. In the picture on the left from 1955, you see that original Princess Kaiulani Tower. Today, of course, as you can tell, it's blocked by the Hyatt Hotel. And the Hyatt Hotel obviously has 2 stories of, again, other things for the hotel for use. So there are restaurants in there, there's a swimming pool up there. And then, of course, pardon me, we didn't mean to go that far. Now, on the left, you can see that original building of the Princess Kaiulani under construction. And today on the right, as you can tell, it is blocked by the Hyatt Regency. But on the far left of the modern day photograph, you see the 28-story tower that's part of the three tower complex of the Princess Kaiulani Hotel. Again, that was built in 1970. And on the right, the base of the Hyatt hotels also contains several floors of amenities like restaurants and bars. And there's a swimming pool up there. And then, of course, down at street level, there are retail shops. And this is how most hotels in Waikiki have been built, with that at street level and a big tower beyond it. So Waikiki has changed a great deal, and we already knew that, but this is a very good comparison to show you how much that's changed. So now we go to downtown Honolulu, and this is a picture from 1977. And in the center of this picture is a large public sculpture that's called Skygate. Skygate was designed and built by a sculptor, a famous sculptor of the time period, whose name was Isamu Noguchi. And despite having a fully Japanese name, Isamu was actually American, born in the United States, and he was only half Japanese, not fully Japanese. And that Isamu was not his original name. It's a name he chose for himself later on. This scene that we see here is part of the Honolulu Civic Center redevelopment that occurred in the 1970s. And this was a massive plan that brought a lot of government buildings together, government functions together in downtown Honolulu through the construction of a bunch of new buildings and a clearing away of a lot of older buildings that had already been on the site that were both commercial buildings and people's homes through condemnation to create a large park-like space or large park-like spaces in more than one location. And in that park-like space that we see here was the obviously the installation site of Skygate. Skygate was originally criticized in the 70s for costing a lot of money. It cost over $100,000, which is no small amount even today. And people didn't like it in a number of ways because they thought it looked too industrial. They thought it looked not in keeping with the rest of this park-like setting, etc. Well, that level of dislike died down very quickly. And one of the reasons that that occurred was that today, over time, the sculpture is not quite as obvious as it used to be because the trees have grown up around it. And this is what I mean. Here is the same view today in 2025, and Skygate is still there. But again, the monkey pod trees around it that were already there have grown up quite a lot, and other trees have been planted too. So this is more of a green, leafy setting than an open park. And the sculpture doesn't show as much. And also because people are very accustomed to seeing it, and it's not something that they're just seeing for the first time, as it was back in 1977. And here we are, today and yesterday, you might say. And notice that right in the center of these, both of these photographs, that's the same monkey paw tree. And if you look carefully, you can see the same branches are in the same locations. And even though the tree is 50 years older today, you don't really get a sense of that because even though, of course, it's increased in size, it's was already a big tree even back then. One thing that is different, if you look in the background of the 1977 photo, you can see a bunch of other buildings, which today you don't see. And one reason is, of course, that the trees are bigger and there are more trees. But secondly, in between these two photographs, the municipal parking structure was completed. And that, even though it is a huge parking lot, is mostly partly underground. It's partly underground and it's mostly covered by earth and grass and trees. So it serves as a blockage to see those other buildings that are in the background. And that's something that you would never have thought would be possible because we would think a parking building is a large concrete structure. And this one is, but it's underground and it's disguised by vegetation. Okay, now we're on King Street, and it's 1963. And we are looking towards the intersection of King Street and University Avenue. And as you can tell, something's going on. This isn't just a regular day on King Street. This is actually a parade. And if you look carefully on the left, you see a white Lincoln Continental convertible car driving towards us. And look even more carefully, you will see sitting in this car a man on the left side of the vehicle. And he's wearing a white carnation lei and a red carnation lei because he is a celebrity. And this man is L. Gordon Cooper. He is an early American astronaut. And in May of 1963, he completed up which what was up till then the longest American space flight to date. And he circled around the Earth 22 times. And he was up in the near outer space, we might say, for 34 hours. And then he guided his spacecraft down into the Pacific Ocean where he splashed down. He was picked up by a Navy ship and he was brought to Pearl Harbor. And because the space program at that time, NASA, was so popular and was so avidly followed by so many millions of people, every one of the astronauts became an instant celebrity, as did L. Gordon Cooper. And so when he was here in Honolulu, he got to have a parade through the streets in which hundreds of thousands of people came out to see him. And that's what's happening right here. Sitting next to Gordon Cooper is his wife. And that's important because he and his wife had both attended the University of Hawaii in the late 1940s. And of course, that's just up the road, a few blocks to the left. And they met there and they both got married here in the late 1940s. 1949, I believe they were married. Well, by the time Gordon Cooper became an astronaut, it, it was very important for astronauts to have a good public persona. And even though he and his wife had actually separated and were living apart, and they had two teenage daughters who were living with their mother, his wife agreed to come back and live with him so that it looked like they were still happily married. So even though they weren't happily married at the time, they proceeded through this parade as though they were, which I find super interesting because PR was so important back then in 1963. Well, now let's discuss what this area looks like. And here's the same view today. On the opposite side of the street from where we are, there are three small concrete buildings. You saw them in the previous picture, and here they are today. They are destined to be demolished at some point in the fairly near future from the time that I'm recording this in June of 2025. But at this time, they're still standing. But as you can see, there have been other dramatic changes in the neighborhood, most specifically with construction of the high-rise building on the opposite corner of University Avenue, as you see right here in the center of the picture. And also, King Street is still in the same place, but because of the increase in the number of vehicles, it now has been widened considerably with the addition of several more lanes because the previous size was no longer adequate. It also is one way in going away from us in this direction, which helped increase its traffic capacity too. And that happened back in 1971. So here we are. Here's the comparison. Notice the three small concrete buildings. They're both in both locations, both photographs, but also very strongly visible, not only the single high rise building in the center of the picture, but also the other ones that are in the distance. And that's evidence of Honolulu's growth that has been primarily upwards in the form of multi-story buildings in the years since 1963 and the picture that you see on the left. And the picture on the left shows when Mo'iliili was still kind of a small town neighborhood. It still is to a degree, but not as much as it was back then with the old buildings containing a lot of small independent businesses. They're still there now, but it is not the same feeling as it was back then when also too Mo'iliili was a very identified as a very ethnically Japanese neighborhood, which of course today is no longer as much of a thing as it used to be. Now we're in downtown Honolulu. It's 1958. And we are standing in the crosswalk that's going across Merchant Street in the foreground. And we are looking up Fort Street on the left hand side of the picture. And Fort Street in 1958 was still Honolulu's main shopping street. It's where all the biggest stores were located, although that was changing very rapidly with the growth of shopping centers and branch stores and other big stores gradually being built elsewhere. But at the time, this is still where you went to go to the big stores. And those who are old enough will remember some of the important local stores of the time, McInerney and Liberty House. And both of those stores can be identified in that picture on the left hand side of the street. There's also the Hub menswear off in the distance. There's a Woolworth store too. These are all businesses that are long since gone, but at the time were very important. And also, obviously, Fort Street is still a regular street. There are cars on it, there are cars driving on it, and there are cars parked on it. Well, if we come forward to today, it is a very different view. First of all, Fort Street is no longer a functioning street because it was turned into a pedestrian mall in 1969. And so there's no traffic on it anymore. And also, downtown has changed a great deal in that in the 1960s and 70s and 80s, all of the low rise buildings along Fort Street, or in this section of Fort Street anyway, were demolished to be replaced by high rise buildings. And that's obviously what you see in the photograph here, because on the left side of the street is Pioneer Plaza, which was completed in 1977. And on the right is one of the buildings of the three buildings that comprise the Financial Plaza of the Pacific, which opened in 1968, 1969. And when we look at both views together, we can very clearly see the difference and how much this area has changed. And I want to also point out one thing which may not be immediately apparent, but it's also part of how things change. Look at how the crosswalks are designated by white paint on the asphalt. On the left, there are just some small, skinny lines that show where you're supposed to cross the street. But on the right, you can see that today we use the international standard of the very wide stripes, which originated, I believe, in Britain in the period, well, I'm not sure, but in the 20th century, where they were called zebra crossings because the stripes were so pronounced and so very obvious. And today these are found all over the world. We don't think about things like this that are so everyday, but they too are part of what our environments are. And they too also are evidence of how things change over time. And finally, here we are at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific that's located in Punchbowl Crater here in Honolulu. And Punchbowl was completely undeveloped until after World War II. World War II ended in 1945. And at that time, after multiple battles that had taken place in numerous places throughout the Pacific involving the American military against the Japanese, there were many, many American dead who had been buried in a number of different places throughout the Pacific as the war had progressed from 1941 to 1945. So it was decided to construct one large cemetery to contain all of these war dead and to consolidate all of them into one place. And Punchbowl Crater was chosen for this to occur. And the first burials took place beginning 1947, 1948. And then gradually through the 50s, the cemetery was landscaped. The roads were built, et cetera. But in the center of this view is the focal point that you see when you drive onto the property. And that is the white concrete structure that mostly contains what are called the courts of the missing. And these are large marble slabs. They're large marble rectangles, if you will, on which the names are engraved of people who were killed in the Pacific War, but whose remains were never recovered. And not just the Pacific War, but also in Korea, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War. So that's the memorial. And then at the top of the structure, there's a large sculpture that you can see right in the center there. And there also are panels that explain the battles of mostly World War II, but Korea and Vietnam as well. So that hasn't changed much. But what you'll also notice is in this view is how prominent that structure is in the distance because there are no trees that are taking up part of the view. And when we look at this view today, it looks very different. The structures are all still there, the roads are in the same place, but today the trees have grown considerably. And these are banyan trees. And this type of landscaping is called an allée. And that means a row of trees or two rows of trees that are a very large scale way to direct your attention to something in the center. And this is only done, I mean, you can do this on a small scale, but this is something that comes mostly from European garden traditions, although it certainly is done in other cultures as well. And again, it's big and monumental in this case. And it's something that you will see in, for example, Britain in or in other places in Europe in huge estates or palaces on the grounds of royal palaces. So now, if we look at these two side by side, we clearly see that while the built environment is pretty much almost exactly the same, the impression that you get is very different because of the trees. So this is not a change due to humans building things, it's a change due to nature. And in the picture on the left in 1962, those banyan trees are present, but they're just tiny saplings. They're taller than you might think, and they're about 10 feet tall in the picture on the left. But obviously, today they are considerably bigger. Now, they have been trimmed throughout their life and they've been kept rounded so that they are under control and they don't obscure the view because the point is to provide a setting for this view that you see when you come in, but not obscure it by being uncontrollably big. And banyan trees do get uncontrollably big. So that's the end of this Honolulu then and now. That's the end of this look at views that what they look like in the past and what they look like today. And I hope you've gained some information and understanding of why and how these views have changed. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to you joining me again here on ThinkTech Hawaii on How Did We Get Here? I'm DeSoto Brown, and until you look at me next time, aloha, everyone.